Racist pilot harasses a black woman boarding the plane, questioning her right to be in first class. The moment she steps on board, the pilot approaches her with a cold smirk on his face. "Excuse me, miss, I believe you're in the wrong seat," he says, pointing at the first-class section. The woman stands her ground, her calm voice clear. "No, I'm in the right seat." The pilot, dismissing her response, looks her up and down. "People like you don't belong here," he sneers, trying to intimidate her into moving. Without flinching, the woman calmly responds, "I am where I belong." The pilot, now visibly irritated, orders the flight attendants to step in. "Escort her to economy," he commands, thinking that his authority will force her to comply. But the woman stands tall, unwavering. The passengers, silently watching the exchange, hold their breath, unsure of what will happen next. What they don't know is the shocking twist waiting to unfold. This woman is not just any passenger. She's the owner of the airline. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. The pilot storms down the aisle, his face angry as he looks at the black woman sitting in first class. "You need to move," he says, his voice harsh. The black woman, still on her phone, doesn't react right away. She finishes her conversation calmly and then looks at the pilot. "Excuse me?" she asks. The pilot repeats, more forcefully, "Move to your seat in economy. This is for first-class passengers only." She doesn't say anything at first, and the other passengers start to notice the tension. Some of them watch quietly, unsure of what's happening. The flight attendants are still not intervening. Finally, the black woman puts her phone down, looks at the pilot, and says, "I'm not moving." The pilot, now clearly upset, snaps, "You're not allowed to sit here." She stays calm, looks directly at him, and says, "I own this airline." The words stop him in his tracks. He stares at her, his mind racing to understand what she just said. The passengers around them fall silent. No one expected this. The pilot hesitates, still confused. "Excuse me?" he asks, not believing what he's hearing. The black woman calmly takes out her ID and shows it to him. "I'm the owner, and what you just did is not acceptable." The pilot's face turns pale as he finally realizes what she means. The tension in the air is thick. Everyone is watching, waiting to see what happens next. The pilot's face turns white as the black woman hands him the ID. He stares at it, still in disbelief. His hand trembles slightly as he slowly glances up at her, his anger turning into fear. I don't believe this," he stutters, his voice shaky. He looks around, clearly unsure of what to do next. This is a misunderstanding." But the black woman remains calm, sitting back in her seat, unfazed. "No, it's not a misunderstanding. You were disrespectful, and now you need to fix it." The tension in the cabin is palpable. Some passengers glance nervously at each other, whispering. Others watch in silence, waiting to see what will happen. The flight attendants have gathered near the cockpit, exchanging uneasy glances. The pilot stands there, still holding her ID, trying to make sense of the situation. His mouth opens as if he wants to say something, but nothing comes out. Then, with a deep breath, he finally speaks. "You can't just take the seat from someone else like that. You shouldn't be in first class," he says, trying to regain some control over the situation. At this point, a flight attendant walks over, sensing the growing tension. She whispers something to the pilot, who nods. Then, with an apologetic glance at the black woman, he slowly turns and walks back to the cockpit. For a moment, everything feels still. The passengers are left to wonder what will happen next. Some are silently hoping the black woman gets justice, while others still don't quite understand why the pilot acted the way he did. The flight attendants return to their stations, but one of them, looking worried, pulls out her phone to quickly send a message. It's not long before a police officer boards the plane. The sound of his boots echo on the cabin floor as he approaches the black woman, who remains seated, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. The police officer approaches the black woman, his expression neutral but watchful. He asks her to stand up, and with a slight nod, she complies. The passengers hold their breath, unsure of what's about to unfold. The officer looks at her, then at the flight attendants, and finally back at her ID that the pilot is still holding. "We have to ask you to leave the plane, ma'am," the officer says, his voice professional, but without sympathy. The black woman's calm demeanor doesn't falter. She stands tall, unwavering, but before she can respond, the flight attendant who had been standing nearby steps forward. "Excuse me, officer," she says with authority, but she doesn't need to leave. The officer looks at her, surprised by her intervention. The flight attendant takes a deep breath and points to the pilot, who's standing at the cockpit door, nervously looking at the scene unfolding. "This woman, she's the owner of this airline," the flight attendant reveals, her voice clear and steady. There's a collective pause. The police officer's eyes widen in realization, his mouth opening but not quite sure what to say next. The black woman looks at the officer calmly, a small, knowing smile creeping onto her face. The pilot, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly straightens his posture. His face turns a shade paler as he stammers, I didn't know. I didn't realize." The black woman walks past the officer toward the pilot. Her voice, though calm, carries authority as she speaks. "It's okay. You've learned something today. But you need to make sure this never happens again." The tension that had filled the cabin begins to dissipate. The passengers exhale, some muttering to each other in disbelief, while others exchange looks of relief. The officer, still looking a bit flustered, steps back and watches as the situation resolves. The pilot looks sheepish, clearly embarrassed by his behavior. He tries to apologize, but the black woman doesn't seem interested in hearing it. "Your apology isn't needed," she says, her tone final. "But perhaps some education is. I'll make sure of that." As the black woman stands in front of the pilot, her posture strong and unyielding, the tension in the cabin is palpable. The passengers are all silent, eyes wide, some still in disbelief at what's happening. The pilot, still trying to comprehend the gravity of his actions, takes a step back, his face flushed with embarrassment. He mutters a half-hearted apology, but it's clear that his words don't carry the weight they should. "Apologies are meaningless when actions speak louder," the black woman responds, her voice calm but firm, yet filled with an undeniable authority. She turns to the flight attendants, who have gathered nearby, waiting to see how things will unfold. But before anything else can happen, a woman in the crowd stands up from her seat, her eyes locked on the pilot. Her voice rings out clearly in the quiet cabin. "You should be ashamed of yourself." The words seem to echo across the cabin, and another passenger joins in. "This is absolutely disgusting. You treat a customer like that just because of her race?" The room is starting to shift. Passengers, who had been silent observers up until now, begin to murmur and whisper to each other. More voices join the growing chorus of dissent. They're outraged, not only at the pilot's actions, but also at the blatant racism that has just unfolded before them. Some passengers pull out their phones to record the scene, capturing the injustice that's taking place. The black woman, standing in the center of the cabin, faces the pilot one last time. Her expression is unwavering as she addresses the passengers. "This isn't just about me. This is about all of us, about how we allow these things to continue. How many of you have been silent when you saw something wrong happening? This needs to change." Her words hang in the air, and the passengers fall silent, reflecting on her statement. Some look at each other, while others stare at the floor, realizing that they've been complicit in letting incidents like this go unchallenged. The flight attendant steps forward again, speaking with the kind of authority that only comes from someone who's seen enough. "We're going to report this to the airline, and I will personally ensure that the proper actions are taken." The passengers, now fully behind the black woman, begin to voice their agreement. "He shouldn't get away with this," one man says. "He should face consequences for what he's done." The black woman nods, acknowledging the support she's receiving from the passengers. She doesn't smile, but there's a sense of quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that her stand has sparked something bigger. As the cabin begins to quiet down, the pilot looks at the woman, his expression now filled with regret and guilt. "I'm so sorry," he repeats, his voice weak, but the woman shakes her head. "This apology means nothing," she responds coolly, "but your accountability will." With that, the flight attendant leads the pilot to the cockpit, where the incident will be reported. Meanwhile, the black woman returns to her seat, knowing she's not only standing up for herself, but for everyone who has ever been silenced by racial injustice. The cabin is still buzzing with the energy of the recent confrontation. As the passengers settle into a tense silence, the black woman looks out the window, her mind calm, but her heart racing. The impact of her words still hangs in the air, and the passengers are processing what just occurred. They know something has shifted, not just on this flight, but perhaps in how they'll handle injustice in the future. The flight attendants, who were mere bystanders at the beginning, now stand as pillars of support. They exchange looks, their expressions showing that they understand the gravity of what has unfolded. The black woman's actions have made them rethink their own role in allowing mistreatment to continue unchallenged. The pilot has been taken away from the cabin, his head lowered in shame. The plane, still in the air, has become a microcosm of what can happen when the truth comes to light. As the seatbelt sign goes off and the plane continues its flight, the woman is finally left in peace. But the story is far from over. The flight attendants approach the woman's seat again, their faces showing respect and remorse. One of them, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, speaks softly. "We just want to thank you for standing up like you did. We were all a little shocked by what happened, but we'll make sure this never happens again." The black woman nods, not needing further words. She understands the sentiment, but she also knows that actions speak louder than words. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," she replies, her voice steady and full of resolve. The apology means nothing. What matters is that something changes. What matters is that we keep fighting. As the plane continues its course, passengers who had been silent now begin to speak up, quietly but with growing conviction. One man, sitting across the aisle, turns to the woman and says, "You were brave today. I'm glad you spoke up." Others begin to express similar sentiments, and the woman, though humble, realizes that her act of standing up has planted seeds of change in those around her. It's not just about this one incident. It's about the ripple effect that starts when someone refuses to let injustice slide. She thinks back to the young girl who was sitting in the seat across from her, watching with wide eyes. She knows that the little girl will remember this moment. She'll remember how the adults stood up for what was right, and how one person's courage turned the tide. The black woman's phone rings, and she answers it. It's her lawyer, who has already been notified about the incident. "We're going to make sure this is dealt with," her lawyer says. "The airline will do everything they can to ensure the pilot is held accountable for his actions." The woman smiles, her heart lightened by the confirmation that justice will be served. "Thank you," she responds. This isn't over yet. As the flight progresses and the plane prepares for landing, the black woman feels a sense of calm wash over her. The journey ahead may be long, but she knows the fight for equality is worth it. The passengers on this flight will now carry this lesson with them, and so will she. Her phone rings once more, but this time it's an unexpected call. The airline's CEO is on the line. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened today. The CEO says, you should never have been treated like that. And I want you to know that this will not go unnoticed. I'm making sure the pilot is reassigned immediately. Please allow me the chance to meet with you and make things right. The black woman, her resolve even stronger now, replies, thank you. I'll be waiting. As the plane lands, the black woman feels a wave of relief wash over her. The tension that had been palpable throughout the flight now begins to dissolve. The events of the day are far from over, but she knows that she's made a powerful impact, not just in the cabin, but across the airline and beyond. She gathers her belongings as the seatbelt sign goes off, the other passengers watching her with expressions of respect and admiration. There's no denying it. The flight had been a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed the incident. The situation was no longer just about a personal confrontation with a racist pilot. It had grown into a broader conversation about how people must take a stand against discrimination. As the woman exits the plane, her phone rings again. This time, it's a call from a news station. We've been following your story, and we want to hear from you, the reporter says. The public is already buzzing about what happened on that flight. Will you talk to us? She hesitates for a moment, then agrees. After everything she's been through, speaking out feels important. The reporter's questions are direct but respectful. They ask her about the pilot's behavior and her decision to stand up in the moment. What led you to respond the way you did? The reporter asks. I've had enough, she answers calmly. It's time to stop letting things slide. If we don't stand up for what's right, who will? This wasn't just about me, it's about everyone who faces discrimination. Her words are powerful, and they resonate deeply with the reporter and the viewers. The story spreads like wildfire across social media, news outlets, and blogs. The hashtag #, Stand Up for What Is Right, begins trending. People from all over the world are sharing their thoughts, with many expressing their admiration for the woman's bravery. Others recount their own experiences with racism, thanking her for being their voice. Meanwhile, the airline's social media pages are flooded with comments. Some are supportive, praising the woman's strength, while others express outrage at the actions of the pilot. The company quickly issues a public statement. We are deeply sorry for the incident on Flight 325. We do not condone any form of discrimination. The pilot has been removed from duty, and we are conducting a full investigation. The airline's response, though swift, does little to quell the public outrage. Many believe the company needs to do more to ensure that such behavior is not repeated. People are demanding accountability not just from the pilot, but from the airline's leadership. The pressure mounts. The woman's lawyer also speaks out, reinforcing the commitment to make sure the pilot is held accountable. This isn't just about one individual, it's about the system, the lawyer says. We want to ensure that this kind of behavior is addressed in every corner of the airline industry. Across the country, activists and organizations begin to take notice. Racial equality groups start organizing rallies, urging people to join the conversation and demand systemic change. The woman, though still reeling from the emotional weight of the day, realizes that her actions have ignited a much larger movement. She's not just an individual fighting for herself. She's become the face of a much-needed fight against racism and injustice. In the days that follow, she receives numerous messages of support from strangers who have been inspired by her courage. The little girl who had witnessed the confrontation on the plane even sends a message. "I want to be like you when I grow up." The girl writes, "You showed me how to stand up." The woman's heart swells with pride. This fight was not just for her. It was for everyone who has been silenced, overlooked, or oppressed. Her efforts have created ripples that will continue to spread, and she knows she's not done yet. As she responds to the messages, she reflects on how far she's come and how much further there is to go. As the news about the confrontation between the black woman and the racist pilot continues to circulate, the public's reaction grows louder. The woman, who was once just a passenger, has now become a symbol of courage and strength in the face of discrimination. Her story spreads across social media, news outlets, and public forums, sparking a global conversation about racism in the airline industry and beyond. In the days following the incident, the woman is bombarded with messages of admiration and support. People from all walks of life, including activists, celebrities, and ordinary citizens, send her words of encouragement, praising her for standing up to injustice. Her actions have struck a deep chord with those who have experienced similar forms of discrimination, and they see her as a role model for speaking out. She finds herself at the center of a movement. But while the attention is overwhelming, the woman remains focused on the bigger picture. "This is not just about me," she states in a heartfelt interview. "This is about all the people who have been made to feel less than, simply because of their race or background. It's about fighting for a world where people are treated with respect, regardless of who they are." Her words resonate deeply with viewers, especially those in positions of power. Corporate leaders, politicians, and individuals in the media begin to take notice of the impact she's made. The conversation shifts from just discussing the incident itself to addressing the larger issue of systemic racism and how institutions must act to eliminate it. The airline, now at the forefront of the controversy, makes a public statement acknowledging the problem. They express their regret over the incident, apologize to the woman, and announce new policies and initiatives aimed at preventing such behavior in the future. The airline's CEO, who had previously remained silent, reaches out to the woman personally, requesting a meeting to discuss how they can work together to address these issues. "I want this moment to be a turning point," the woman says during one of her public speeches. "It's not enough to just say sorry. We need to make sure this never happens again. It's time for companies to step up, take responsibility, and create environments where people of all races feel welcome and respected." Her message is clear and unapologetic. Real change requires commitment and action. In the weeks that follow, she is invited to speak at several high-profile conferences and forums, where she continues to push for meaningful change. She participates in discussions on how organizations can create diversity and inclusion initiatives that go beyond just hiring practices and into the very fabric of their corporate culture. But the impact of the woman's actions doesn't stop there. As the conversation spreads, public policies and industry regulations are called into question. Government agencies begin reviewing airline industry practices, considering reforms to ensure that incidents like this one are addressed swiftly and with transparency. National conversations begin to center on racial bias training for all public-facing industries, with a focus on the importance of cultural awareness and respect. Meanwhile, the woman receives widespread recognition for her bravery. She is honored with awards from human rights organizations and diversity groups. Her story becomes a symbol of resilience, of standing up against a system that has often been slow to change. Yet despite all the accolades, she remains humble, continuously redirecting the praise to those who have fought alongside her for equality. "I didn't do this alone," she reminds her supporters. "I stand with all of you who believe that change is possible." In a particularly moving moment, she meets with the team from the airline, where they discuss a long-term strategy to create lasting change. The CEO and executives express their gratitude for her willingness to engage in these difficult conversations. Together, they begin developing a training program for their staff, focusing on addressing racial biases and fostering a more inclusive environment for both employees and passengers. The goal is to make sure that no one else ever has to experience what I did, the woman says, determined. "We need to build systems that work for everyone, not just a select few. That's how true change happens." As the months pass, the airline's efforts to create a more inclusive culture become a model for others in the industry. Other airlines begin adopting similar diversity and inclusion programs, inspired by the example set by this woman and the airline's willingness to take accountability. Her story continues to inspire thousands of people around the world to take action in their own communities and workplaces, pushing for equality and justice. In her own personal journey, the woman reflects on how far she has come since that fateful flight. She thinks about the emotions she felt when the pilot first targeted her: shock, anger, and disbelief. But those feelings have been replaced with a deep sense of purpose. Her voice has been amplified in ways she never imagined, and her mission to fight for justice has only just begun. Her legacy grows stronger every day. She continues to speak out on behalf of those who have been silenced for too long. "This is just the beginning," she says, with a powerful resolve in her voice. "We are changing the narrative. Together we can make this world a better, more inclusive place for all people, no matter the color of their skin or where they come from." And so, the woman's story becomes more than just a confrontation with a racist pilot. It is a call to action for everyone to rise up against injustice, to hold institutions accountable, and to build a society where equality is not just an ideal but a reality. Her bravery continues to reverberate, reminding us all that when we stand up for what's right, we can change the world.